I'm Nadia. I'm 35 years old, and I never thought I'd be betrayed by the two men I trusted most. Before I continue, let me know in the comments what part of the world you're watching from. Also subscribe, because another story will be posted tomorrow. I met Daniel when I was 22. He was charming, ambitious, and funny in a way that made you forget all the ways the world had disappointed you. We married 2 years later, full of big dreams and bigger trust. He supported me through law school while working at his father's construction company. I thought we were a team. My brother, Marcus, was a different story. We were close once, inseparable as kids, but time, money, and jealousy drove a wedge between us. He struggled after high school, never quite finding his path. When I got my law degree, he congratulated me with a half-hearted smile and a joke about me becoming the family boss. I laughed it off. I shouldn't have. My parents weren't wealthy, but they had land. 5 acres in upstate New York, left to them by my grandfather. As they got older, Dad made it clear he wanted it passed down fairly. 1/3 each, he used to say, no favorites. You, Marcus, and Jess. Jess, our younger sister, had no interest in the land. She lived in California and had already said she'd sign her share to me or Marcus one day. Still, it was meant to be split. Until the will changed. It happened after Dad passed unexpectedly from a stroke. Just a month before, he had mentioned finalizing estate paperwork, said he'd talk to his lawyer and update his beneficiaries. But no one saw the new version, not until the reading. And by then, Mom was gone too. Died of heartbreak, they said. Or maybe she just didn't want to live in a house without him. The will left everything, land, home, assets, to Marcus. Nothing to Jess. Nothing to me, no mention of equal thirds, no explanation. Just one sentence. All property and assets to be transferred to Marcus Taylor upon my death. I felt the room spin. Daniel sat beside me, holding my hand. Marcus didn't even look surprised. He just nodded, like he expected it. Jess was on speakerphone, silent on the other end. I was too stunned to speak. After the meeting, Marcus hugged me stiffly and said, "Don't take it personally. Dad probably thought you didn't need it. With your law firm and all." I stared at him. My law firm was 2 years old and still in debt from startup costs. Daniel chimed in. "Maybe it's best. Less drama, you know?" I didn't understand why he'd say that, but I swallowed my questions. A few days later, I started to feel off. Paranoia. Like something wasn't right. Dad had always been fair. He wouldn't cut me out completely. Not without telling me. I started digging. I contacted Dad's former lawyer, Mr. Grant. He was surprised to hear the will had changed. "I never filed any update," he said. "The last I spoke to your father, he still wanted it split 3 ways. I asked him to send me the last version he had on record. He did. It named all 3 of us equally, dated just 5 months before Dad died. I requested a copy of the filed will from probate court, the one read at the hearing. It was dated 6 weeks before Dad's death. The signature looked off, too clean, too sharp for a man whose hands shook from Parkinson's tremors. That's when I started thinking the unthinkable. Forgery, fraud, and I had no proof. Until I remembered something. Our family had an old voice recorder. Dad used it when his hands got too shaky to write. He recorded reminders, thoughts, even parts of his will, then asked someone to transcribe it. It was tucked away in the study, buried under books and papers. I hadn't looked through it since the funeral. One rainy afternoon, I went back to the house. Marcus had already moved in, but I still had a key. He wasn't home. I let myself in, heart pounding like I was trespassing on my own childhood. In the study, I found the recorder exactly where I remembered it. I charged it up, pressed play, and listened. Most were mundane entries, reminders about medications, rants about the broken fence. Then I heard it. A file dated 10 days before his death. "I don't trust Marcus with the land," Dad's voice crackled. "If anything happens to me, I want Nadia and Jess to have it. Equal parts. Marcus isn't responsible. He and Daniel too much talk lately. Can't tell what they're planning. I'm calling Mr. Grant Monday." I stopped the recording and stared at the device. My ears rang. My lungs felt tight. Dad knew something. He sensed something. And he named both Marcus and Daniel, my husband. That night, I confronted Daniel. I played the audio. He didn't deny it. His face went pale. "You weren't supposed to find that," he said. I didn't yell, didn't cry. I just asked, "How long have you and my brother been planning this?" He hesitated, then said, "Since your dad got sick." He said it like he was admitting to a business merger gone slightly off course. No shame, no guilt, just logistics. I left the house that night. I took my laptop, the recorder, and my dignity. I slept on my best friend Kayla's couch for a week. Then I filed the petition to contest the will, on the grounds of undue influence and fraud. Marcus filed a motion to dismiss. Daniel served me divorce papers. But I had the recording, and it was admissible. The court date was set, and I was ready. I walked into court with my spine straight and my jaw tight. I wore my Navy suit, the one I kept for depositions and arbitration hearings, the one that made me feel like armor. Kayla sat behind me, hands folded in her lap, eyes fierce. Marcus strutted in like he was attending a charity gala. Grinning, nodding at people like this was just another social event. Daniel followed close behind. Slick hair, tailored jacket, and that same expression he used when closing deals. Like everything was already his. I didn't look at either of them. Their attorney, Mr. Crane, stood and called for dismissal again. "Your Honor," he said, "this is nothing more than sour grapes from someone excluded from a will. The will is valid, properly signed and witnessed. There's no evidence of fraud." I stood slowly. "Actually, Your Honor, there is." I handed the judge a labeled USB stick. The deceased recorded verbal notes just days before his death. This file outlines his true intentions and his suspicions. The judge leaned forward. "I'll review the contents in chambers. For now, continue." Mr. Crane turned to me with a patronizing smile. "You're claiming a forged will, Miss Taylor?" "Yes," I said. "And you believe your brother and husband were involved?" "Not believe. I know." They played the recording later that day. In a silent courtroom, my father's voice echoed, "I don't trust Marcus. Daniel and him have been whispering. If I die, give it to the girls." The moment the audio ended, you could hear the breath leave the room. Even the judge leaned back slowly, visibly shaken. Crane tried to object. "Anyone could have recorded that." The judge shut him down. "We'll verify voice authentication and date stamps. But unless you can explain why the original lawyer never saw this will update, we proceed." My lawyer submitted the previous will from Mr. Grant, the one naming all three of us, and then came the witnesses. The notary listed on the new will had died the month before it was supposedly signed. The document was dated July 12th. The notary's obituary, July 1st. Crane looked like he wanted to disappear. Daniel wouldn't meet my eyes. Marcus looked like a child caught stealing from a cookie jar. The judge ordered a handwriting analysis. Over the next few weeks, I collected more. Phone records, emails. A message from Marcus to Daniel 2 days after Dad's funeral. "She's never going to know. We got this." I forwarded it to my attorney. Evidence stacked like bricks, each one exposing just how far they'd gone. During a break, I passed Daniel in the hallway. He tried to speak. "Nadia, I cut him off. You betrayed me. You let my father be buried under lies." He reached for my hand. I pulled it away. "I would have given you everything. You didn't have to steal it." The next morning, I received a letter from Jess. She'd hired her own attorney and was joining the case. She'd been quiet until then, unsure what to believe. But once she heard the recording, she made her decision. "You're not alone," she wrote. "I may live far away, but I won't let them erase you." In the next hearing, the judge allowed discovery. Daniel tried to claim marital privilege. It didn't hold. He wasn't just my husband. He was part of a scheme. The court saw it. Marcus cracked during deposition, said Dad had lost his mind toward the end, that he was forgetful and easily confused. But when asked if he had power of attorney, he said no. So who gave him the right to override Dad's wishes? No one. Then came the final blow. A handwriting expert confirmed what I already knew. Dad's signature on the new will was forged. likely traced from a driver's license. Daniel tried to cut a deal, offered to settle, said I could have half the land if I just walked away. I refused. I'm not here for half, I told him. I'm here for the truth. When the final day of trial came, I barely slept. I stared at the ceiling all night, rehearsing everything. What I'd lost, what I'd gained, what it had taken to get here. The courtroom was quiet. The judge looked at each of us. In light of the overwhelming evidence, she said, this court finds the will submitted as fraudulent. All assets will revert to the previous valid version, divided among the 3 children. Jess squeezed my hand. Daniel looked like he'd swallowed glass. Marcus buried his face in his hands. But I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just sat back and exhaled, not because I'd won, but because the truth had finally been heard. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited. I walked past them all. No statements, no headlines, just silence. I didn't need a microphone. My father's voice had said it all. The aftermath wasn't clean. Winning in court doesn't mean healing overnight. It doesn't erase the betrayal. It doesn't put your heart back together. But it gave me clarity, and sometimes that's more powerful than revenge. Marcus moved out of the house 2 weeks later, not because he wanted to, but because the ruling left him legally obligated. He tried to stay, claimed he needed time, but the judge had been firm, 90 days to vacate. Jess and I agreed to sell the land. Neither of us wanted to live with ghosts. Daniel stayed silent. Not a word after the verdict, no apology, no explanation. Just a final email through his lawyer offering to drop the divorce proceedings if I didn't go after him for damages. I declined. I didn't want anything from him, except distance. I focused on rebuilding. I poured myself into my practice, took on more clients, started pro bono work for elder fraud cases, something I never expected to do. But now, it felt personal and purposeful. Kayla called it my redemption arc. Girl, you're like a phoenix, she joked, burned by betrayal and rising from the ashes in a power suit. I laughed. For the first time in months, it didn't feel forced. Jess flew in for the closing on the property. We sat at a coffee shop afterward, papers signed, checks issued. She looked at me and said, I should have believed you sooner. I shook my head. You believed me when it counted. She slid an envelope across the table. I'm giving you my share, she said. You fought for this. I was just a passenger. I stared at her. Jess, no. You don't owe me anything. She smiled. Take it. Use it to build something new. We hugged for a long time, maybe the longest since we were kids. I used the money to open a second office. This one in a neighborhood often overlooked, where people were more vulnerable to manipulation and fraud, where wills got rewritten in quiet kitchens, and no one thought to ask questions. I made it my mission to teach them how to protect themselves, to not end up like my dad, or like me. A few months later, I got a letter, handwritten, from Daniel. Nadia, I've been thinking about everything. I know saying sorry means nothing now, but I am sorry. I let greed get in the way of love. I thought we could get away with it. I thought you'd never find out. I was wrong. And I lost the best person I ever had. If you never forgive me, I understand. Just know, I live with the weight of what I did every day. I didn't respond. Some apologies are more about the person saying them than the one receiving. And I didn't need closure. I already had it. The recorder still sits in my drawer. I haven't played it since the trial. But I keep it. Not for vengeance, for memory. Because sometimes, the voice of the person who loved you most is the only thing that can silence doubt. One afternoon, I visited Dad's grave, brought him a single red rose, sat on the grass in silence, and said, I did it. They didn't win. You were heard. The wind rustled the trees. And for a moment, I felt peace. Not just justice, not just truth, but peace. It didn't last forever, but it didn't have to. Sometimes, a moment is enough, especially when it comes after a storm. I returned home from the cemetery with a strange lightness in my chest. It wasn't happiness. at least not in the traditional sense. But it was the closest thing I'd felt to it in a long time. That night, I made tea and sat on my balcony. The city buzzed below, alive and detached from my quiet little world. I watched headlights trace along the street like fireflies in formation, and I let myself breathe, not because the war was over, but because I was finally fighting on my own terms. The next morning, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I let it ring, then checked the voicemail. "Ms. Taylor, this is Detective Arlo with the County Fraud Division. We've been made aware of possible misconduct in connection to your probate case. Would appreciate a call back at your earliest convenience." My stomach tightened. I called back immediately. Detective Arlo was calm, methodical, and disarmingly polite. "We've received a complaint," he said, "regarding falsified documents connected to your father's estate. It appears someone else submitted a copy of a separate will, one that's different from what the court verified." My pulse kicked. I never submitted more than two, the fraudulent one and the original from my father's lawyer. "I understand," he replied, "but someone tried to introduce a third, one leaving everything to your husband alone." My breath caught. "Daniel." "Likely?" Arlo said. "We're still tracing the submission trail. But your name came up because you're the only one to challenge the probate outcome, and you've done so through legal channels. We're not investigating you, Miss Taylor. We may need your help." It felt like getting dragged into a swamp you thought you'd already crawled out of, but I agreed. I wanted this exposed. Every angle, every hidden motive. Later that week, I met Arlo at the precinct. I handed over the audio files, the court deposition records, the digital trail of emails and texts I'd archived for my case. He listened in silence, then said, "This helps. A lot." By the time I left the station, it was raining again. A steady, soaking downpour that made the sidewalks shimmer. I stood under the awning, letting the moment settle in. They weren't just going to lose the land. They might go to jail. A week later, Arlo called again. We traced the forged document. It was uploaded from a computer belonging to Mr. Daniel Carter. The metadata matches a document he edited using his personal legal software license. My hands clenched into fists. Even after losing the case, Daniel tried to secure everything for himself. And he used his professional credentials to do it. "I'm willing to testify," I told Arlo. "Whatever you need." In the months that followed, everything moved faster. Daniel was arrested for document forgery, fraud, and obstruction. Marcus received a formal subpoena for conspiracy to commit fraud. He pled guilty to avoid jail time, exchanged his sentence for restitution and community service. Daniel fought. He tried to argue that he was misled by Marcus, that he was desperate to protect his future. But the evidence was too overwhelming. He was disbarred, convicted, sentenced to 18 months in prison, with 5 years of probation. I watched the verdict without satisfaction. Just gravity, the full weight of what he'd thrown away. Not just my trust, but his entire future. Kayla and I celebrated with takeout that night. She raised her glass of sparkling cider and said, "To the queen of quiet revenge." I smiled. But this wasn't revenge. "No?" she teased. "Then what would you call it?" "Restoration," I said. "Of truth, of boundaries, of peace." We clinked glasses and laughed. For the first time, it felt real. Joy. Not relief, joy. In the weeks that followed, my firm began receiving more requests for speaking engagements. Workshops on financial abuse. Seminars on legal protection for heirs and aging parents. I took them all. I stood in rooms full of people, strangers, who now saw me as an advocate. Not just a lawyer, but someone who had survived the system and fought back. And won. I told my story at every event. Not to relive the pain, but to show that you can reclaim what's yours, even when the betrayal comes from those closest to you. Because truth doesn't need a stage, just a microphone, and someone brave enough to hold it. 6 months passed, then a year, and the distance between who I was and who I had become stretched wider with each day. I wasn't just Nadia, the woman who exposed her brother and ex-husband. I was Nadia, the woman who redefined what it meant to protect herself, who finally stopped making excuses for people who never made space for her truth. I bought a new home, smaller than the old family property, but all mine. 3 bedrooms, white walls, and sunlight that flooded the kitchen in the morning. A garden I planted myself, tomatoes, basil, and sunflowers that reached above the windowsills. I didn't tell many people I'd moved, just Kayla, Jess, and my team at the firm. It wasn't secrecy, it was peace, and I was learning how to preserve it. One crisp Saturday morning, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name, handwritten on the front. I recognized the writing immediately. Marcus. I sat on my porch steps, coffee in hand, and opened it. Nadia, you don't owe me anything, least of all your attention, but I wanted to say something I should have said a long time ago. I was wrong. About everything. I thought Dad favored you. I thought I had to take what I could before everything slipped through my fingers. But all I did was prove him right. I wasn't ready. I wasn't responsible. And I hurt you in ways I'll never fully understand. I hope someday you find it in your heart to forgive me. Not for me, but so you can be free of the weight I helped put there. Marcus. I read it twice, and then folded it back into its envelope. I didn't cry. I didn't feel anger. I just felt still. Forgiveness wasn't a doorway I needed to walk through that day, but the letter was a crack in a wall that had long stood between us. Jess visited that evening. She brought her daughter Talia, a bright-eyed 3-year-old who called me Aunt Dee Dee and insisted on helping me water the plants. While Talia ran through the yard with her stuffed giraffe, Jess sat beside me on the swing. "You look lighter," she said. "I am," she smiled. Marcus reached out to me too. Told me he's working construction again, living in a shared apartment, said he's sober. "That's good," I said softly. "I hope he keeps going." We sat in silence, the kind that doesn't feel empty. Just honest. I started writing again, essays, reflections, a memoir maybe. Not about the betrayal, but about the boundaries that saved me. I told stories in courtrooms and classrooms, at conferences and libraries. Stories about family, and lies, and the quiet courage it takes to walk away when no one believes you. Then one night, Kayla called. She was breathless, excited. "You need to check your email. Right now." I opened it. A publisher had read one of my articles. They wanted to talk about a book deal. "You're going to be famous," Kayla squealed. I laughed. "I'm just going to be heard." Because that's all I ever wanted. Not revenge, not attention, just to be seen. And believed. And respected. And now I was. Not because I screamed the loudest, but because I never stopped speaking. And eventually, the world listened. The book came out the following spring, titled Inheritance of Silence. Not because I wanted to dwell on the past, but because I knew how many people were still trapped in theirs. It wasn't a bestseller, but it reached the right people. Emails poured in, messages from women, from sons, from cousins, all saying the same thing. "I thought I was alone." One woman wrote, "My brother forged our mom's will. No one believed me, but your story gave me the strength to fight back." Another said, "Reading your book was like breathing for the first time. I kept every message, printed them, stored them in a box labeled, Proof That Truth Matters." Jess and I started hosting a small podcast together. She named it Boundaries and Bloodlines. We recorded once a week, sharing stories, ours and others. We brought in therapists, financial advisors, estate planners, real people who understood how complicated family could be. We didn't pretend to have all the answers, but we had experience. And we had each other. Meanwhile, Daniel completed his sentence. I got the notice from the state, marked, "Release confirmed." No emotion, just information. I didn't reply. He tried to contact me through my publisher. A letter. I never opened it. Some stories don't need a sequel. And some characters don't get redemption arcs. Marcus stayed quiet, but once a year, on the anniversary of the verdict, he sent a donation receipt in my name to a women's legal support foundation. No note, no signature, just acknowledgement. That was enough. I turned 40, surrounded by laughter. Kayla brought balloons. Jess made her famous red velvet cake. Talia sang, "Happy Birthday," with sprinkles on her face. We sat in my backyard under string lights, and I looked around at the people who remained. Not because they had to, but because they chose to. "I never thought this would be my life," I told Kayla. She smirked. "Yeah, you thought it'd be quiet and predictable. Joke's on you." We laughed so hard we cried. Later that night, I stepped onto my balcony with a cup of tea. Same stars, same air. But I was different. I was no longer afraid to be the woman who says no, the woman who protects her peace, the woman who draws a line and enforces it. I'm not telling you this because I want sympathy. I'm telling you this because someone, somewhere, needs permission. Permission to believe their instincts, to stop excusing toxic loyalty, to understand that family without respect is just a cage built from DNA. If you're watching this and it resonates, leave a comment and tell me your story. Let someone else know they're not alone. And subscribe, because I promise, there's another story coming tomorrow. And maybe it'll be the one that changes everything for you.